Welcome, welcome. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome to the Real Personal Branding Podcast. I'm Lauren V. Davis, and I help entrepreneurs, speakers, authors, and small business owners build personal brands that turn visibility and positioning into real business growth and opportunity. Have you ever felt like you were struggling to confidently sell, even when you know your work is valuable? Today, with my very brilliant guest, Sue Heilbronner, we're breaking down how to bring more confidence into your personal brand by leading with your values and staying passionate about your work, but also releasing the expectation of the outcome so that way you can just move more fearlessly towards sales. How does that sound? In this episode, you're going to learn how to craft a 15 to 30 second bio that positions you as the expert people want to work with. You're going to learn how to price confidently by leading with the value you deliver instead of anchoring on a prospect's budget. A really cool mindset about this. And then we're also going to talk about the mindset shift that Sue calls passionate ambivalence. And that is how she makes sales feel more purposeful and more personal rather than stressful. My guest today, I've been mentioning her. Her name is Sue Heilbronner, and she's the former tech CEO, former federal prosecutor. She's an investor, and she's the author of the book, Never Ask for the Sale. I'm going to read you her official bio because Sue is an absolute power player, and I really want you to understand exactly where her expertise comes from. Sue is a sought-after speaker, startup CEO, mentor, adjunct professor of entrepreneurship, facilitator, strategic advisor, conscious leadership coach, and co-founder of the Merge Lane Investment Fund, creator of the Leadership Camp Training Program for High Potential Leaders, former federal prosecutor, and a direct and fearless catalyst for change. Drawing on decades of experience across law, leadership, and company building, Sue helps ambitious founders sell the most important product they'll ever represent, which is themselves. Her philosophy of passionate ambivalence, being deeply invested in the work while unattached to the outcome, reframes sales as a self-awareness practice that fuels clarity, confidence, and better results. As always, if you like what you hear today on this podcast, I would love it if you took a screenshot, share it on social media. I'm L Davis Creative everywhere you can think of, or leave a quick review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify if you haven't already. I promise you, every time you do that, it helps someone new find the show, but it also just truly means the world to me to know which episodes you like, to know which episodes mean a lot to you. So let me know, or feel free to tag me, so that way I can share your content too. Okay, let's get into today's conversation with Sue. I am so excited. Welcome to the Real Personal Branding Podcast, Sue. I am so happy that you're here with us today. Thank you for being here.
Hi, Lauren. I'm so glad to be here. Can't wait to have this conversation.
Yay. Okay, so your history is really interesting and goes through many different journeys and many different paths, but you are a former federal prosecutor. You are also a solopreneur, you are a coach, you have been a trainer, you have worked in high-level organizations, corporate organizations, and you're also now in this really, really cool leadership space. How did some of these transitions that you've been through shape your journey? Tell me a little bit more about how you went from all of these different roles to where you are now.
Lauren, I think a really consistent theme for me that I've started to realize, and it's honestly something I need to manage as a coach, because it's something that all of our own individual qualities seem obvious to us. And so I don't necessarily realize that not everyone has the mindset that I have. My mindset is heavily oriented toward change, and that cuts across every area of my life. So I don't necessarily think I get bored easily. It's not that. I think, and it's not quite shiny object syndrome either. It's more that I think I've made choices that have been consistent with what is happening for me or what I'm great at, or I think I'm great at the time in my life. And I've viewed kind of my career as a sequence of big opportunities that I've either picked or created, and that has felt easy for me. I realize that creates, again, as I said, a little bit of a bias. But I'm also a really optimistic person. So things generally feel easier because I work really hard and that's okay. It still feels easy. If that's a terrible answer,
Yeah.
but that's true.
I think that leaning into change is something that is really hard to do, right? That's something that not everyone feels is easy. Is there a way that you think that you look at change, or maybe a pivot that taught you the most about trusting your own instincts?
Yeah. First of all, let's just acknowledge where we are in the economy when you and I are talking right now, which is a
Yes.
time where change, a mindset that embraces change is just incredibly helpful because change is happening in the job landscape, whether we want it or not. The answer to your question is that I have a belief, this is not always true for everyone, but I have a belief that if I am doing things that are really enlivening to me, that I will likely create more magnetism in the world and be able to make something happen. Now, I get enlivened by things that have relevance in the economy because I like making money and I like building businesses. So it might be different if I really, really loved studying the mating behaviors of ants. It might be harder to make a living if those were my preferences. But there are roles for that too. But I would say, in answer to your question, I've just followed trends. So when I was a lawyer, you mentioned at the Justice Department, which was a whole different Justice Department than it is today, unfortunately. When I was there, the internet started becoming incredibly relevant as a consumer vehicle. It really was very similar to what's happening with AI right now, maybe even more concussive, because it was just a whole new way of doing everything. Like work was just happening there and nowhere else. And I decided to experiment. This is another feature. I like change and I like experimenting. So I didn't quit my very secure blue chip job at the Justice Department to go be an internet entrepreneur. I wouldn't have done that just because I had a mortgage and a partner and whatever, life. But I was able to moonlight at an e-commerce company that I created to try to see if there was a potential bridge there out of a relatively inexpensive experiment.
So I think this is interesting because I think we're going to see a theme here that you definitely lean into curiosity. Would you say that that's true?
Yeah, I think that's a great way of saying that.
Yeah. Well, I think that that is a great way to experience change. Like to not throw your hands up and say, oh my gosh, I'm in a panic now, but to say, okay, what is this? What could this make possible? Or what is this making room for? And you, just like what you said, like if you were taking the time to instinctively move towards the things that enliven you, right? Then you do produce more creativity, you produce more things that make people say like, oh, that person is on fire, I need to gravitate towards them more. So thank you for sharing that. So
Yeah.
you've built companies across e-commerce, digital publishing, travel, education. Which of those experiences sparked the earliest seeds of what you call, which we're going to talk about more, passionate ambivalence?
Thank you
Yeah.
for asking. I after I left the law, I went to a large company, which is now called Warner Brothers Discovery. And I spent about 4 years there, like learning actual business. I had never opened Excel in my own business. I was a lawyer. I just didn't know what business was. So that all happened. And then I made a decision to leave this large company, which was a privilege to work there. But I left after about 4 years to go work at what was then a digital revenue generation agency in the hospitality sector. And it was a much smaller company, and there was a reason for that. I'm kind of rebellious. So it felt good to be at a smaller rather than a big company with a lot of structure and hierarchy and whatever. When I went there, I remember one of the co-founders of that company saying that so far in that company's life cycle, no one other than this co-founder had been able to sell anything to a hotel chain or an individual boutique hotel.
Wow.
And so he had a lot of skepticism about whether I could sell as I was representing I could. And when I got into that space, he was excellent. I learned a ton from him. And I was able to sell from this very small company into very large hotel chains, because what we were doing was like ended up being 10 years ahead of what hotel chains had figured out about the internet and driving demand through the internet. And I learned how to make this small company sound bigger and tell large chains that it was their size that was causing them to be slow, and that we were going to speed up their evolution, and that was easier done from the outside than the inside. And that confidence created an awareness that selling with confidence, or what I now call passionate ambivalence, was frankly the only way to sell big things or big prospects.
I love this. Kind of like what I talk about often with how when I started in very small businesses, I owned a record store for 16 years and a gift store. And I had a nonprofit for local businesses that helped lots of local businesses in our community. And what I found was like traveling out to these speakers and these entrepreneurs and these big events, all of those people needed to build community and needed to build story and like the special feeling around their brand, just like local businesses do. And in order to become a legendary local business, you have to tell your story. You have to give your purpose. You have to share why you're there and let the community support that purpose. And so it kind of reminds me of that. Like the same principles apply to large companies that apply to that people want to support the things with purpose. They want to support the things that make a difference to them. And I think that is really interesting about what you're saying. So for the people that are listening to this, who are more familiar with the traditional sales culture of like sell, 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 you have written this book that kind of changes the mindset of that, right? It changes the mindset of traditional selling. And what is the first internal shift that is needed to begin practicing passionate ambivalence?
So passionate ambivalence, let's just define it for your audience, okay?
Yeah.
First of all, it comes from, thank you for mentioning it in my book, which is called Never Ask for the Sale. And the concept of passionate ambivalence is the idea that you as a seller, and by the way, I think just as you just said about the local businesses and the local community and finding the story that you need to tell and deciding on purpose and having the community support you in that purpose, all of that is core. You and I, our sales philosophies are very similar, but I just want to say, I consider that selling, right? I think when some people might be offended by this idea, but most of us are selling all the time. Candidly, if you're on a dating site, you are selling. If you move to a new city and you're trying to make friends, you are selling. The reason people have an aversion to this is they imagine that selling is aggressive and dishonest and unnatural. And the way you just described it in your town is the way I think about it. So selling is not an action. Selling, the first shift, is getting super aligned across what you care about, what your core values are, what you're great at, and what the market might need. And once you get aligned with that, and then the second shift, realizing that it's okay to let other people know what that is. And it is okay to say that this is what you do without apologizing or being embarrassed or being ashamed. That is okay. It's essential to do that, walking around town marketing, the building personal magnetism. And so the next time someone says to you, asks you, what are you up to in the world, which is code for what do you do? You actually answer the question instead of acting like either what they're asking is criminal or that you're not actually allowed to answer.
I love that you said that because I think so many people shy away from, especially entrepreneurs and solopreneurs, small business owners, they shy away from talking about what they're doing because they think it's going to come across a certain way. And I always try to remind them, like, this is not only your livelihood and how you pay your bills, but this is also something that you took a huge chance on to be an entrepreneur, to be a solopreneur in this world. Like to say, I'm going to risk my steady paycheck, my comfortableness, in many ways, other things too, to say, I'm going to do this business and this is going to be who I am. And I'm doing this because I can't even dream of a life where I don't try, you know?
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
I think that's really important to say that, because I hear that so much, right? That thing that tells people, like, don't talk about your business, don't talk about yourself. Like, it's, people are going to think you're this or that. So thank you for saying that. How can someone catch themselves when they maybe listen to other coaches online, listen to other people saying, like, no, you have to catch more fish with a wider net, or you have to, be in people's DMs. How can someone catch themselves if they slip into outcome chasing, I guess is how I would put it.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of thinking about that. And I realize I didn't totally define passionate ambivalence. So passionate ambivalence is the idea that you can be passionate as you are about an opportunity or about a prospect or about your new business. And when you are out in the market, either doing soft marketing, just being a person in your community, being in a group on social media, you also ought to allow yourself or create a situation for yourself where you can be wholly unattached to whether or not any specific piece of business closes. So it is exactly the opposite, as you say, of outcome chasing. And it's super tempting. One of the things I've noticed about this idea of passionate ambivalence is that, sales leaders who've been doing this for 30 years, they'll say something to me like, Sue, I mean, this is a great strategy. I mean, obviously being a little distant and not pushing people really hard will attract more people to your sales proposition. Of course, that's true, they'll say. And then they'll say, but what happens when it's the end of the quarter and you have a quota you have to hit? And I say, exactly the same approach. It's not that passionate ambivalence is just like a technique to make you feel happy. Passionate ambivalence is actually a way to sell. Now, this is difficult, but the main reason it's difficult is that the person I just described, that guy who's been doing this for 30 years, or the person you may be thinking about who's pushing in DMs or floating a text, they are running a story that if they do that, they are more likely to sell. And my answer to that is, it's slightly possible that they are more likely maybe to get someone to say yes sooner. But my belief is if that other person says yes, the short and long-term prospects of the size of that business and the quality of that business relationship are both severely compromised by selling that way.
Oh, like I have the chills literally, because this is exactly, I could not agree more. And I didn't even know that I would be like, yes, 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 on every single thing, because we're just meeting for the first time. So how can people, entrepreneurs, especially like small business owners, solopreneurs, that's who I talk to the most, consultants, coaches, right?
Yeah.
What kind of early habits can you encourage people to build to interrupt those patterns of like how they think about sales right now?
Number one, I want them to be sure they have a high quality 15 to 30-second way of talking about what they do, so that wherever they go, I want their top of funnel, as they say, Lauren, or we say, I want their top of funnel to be bigger, because if their top of funnel is really small, then they think that every single person they talk to that might be a sales conversation is the last available person on earth. So you are doing this. You've already told me so much about yourself and how you think about this in terms of how you think about community where you are. And I want people to be doing that. And in order to do that, they have to have a really succinct, quality way of talking about their gifts in the world. In my book, I talk about the concept of building a 30-second bio, and there are a lot of techniques that are very detailed. This book is not conceptual. It's highly tactical for any, I mean, especially a solopreneur. It applies to anyone in sales or anyone trying to build a business, founders included. But for solopreneurs, it's basically a guidebook with extreme tactics on how to do these things. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is for them to notice that if the top of their funnel gets bigger, every lead is less precious. And the only thing they need to measure themselves against is not how fast they close a piece of business, but how the business is priced, how likely the business is to remain with them over the long run, and how much they will enjoy doing the work. And if they think about those three things, they will have a more enduring long-term business, especially solopreneurs, because what ends up happening is if all those locks, all those things click into place, they're not doing that much marketing. They're just sitting around waiting for other people to reach out to them because word of mouth and the flywheel becomes so successful.
Yes, amen to all of that. And I think you tie so much of your framework that in your book into identifying and working from this place that is the best place that you work at, right? Like the best situation, environment that you work in, which is kind of like your zone of genius. And yep. I love talking about the zone of genius. Big fan of The Big Leap. I've had Gay Hendricks on this podcast as well. Yeah. And I also think that what you just said about like, how good are you going to feel in this client relationship? How sustainable is it over time? The trust part and that like building block and that foundation is so important to sustainability, right? There's a lot of people out there that will say like, you don't need the trust part. You can just sell something to someone. It has to be what they want at that exact given time. And then they'll buy it because they need it. Well, yeah, that's true to some extent. But if you want sustainability over time, you want the clients to stay with you for a long amount of time, and you want to enjoy the work that you're doing, you do have to have that trust factor. So how can someone practically pinpoint that zone of genius in themselves if they feel skilled in a lot of different areas, or maybe they are unsure of where they are the strongest, where that zone of genius shows up?
Sure. And I'm so glad that you brought up, thank you for mentioning Gay Hendricks and the book, The Big Leap, because it is the Bible of this concept and the source of all of my knowledge on this. And I've been talking about zone of genius now for a really long time, as in my career, especially in the last 15 years as a coach. The thing that I think is most helpful for people around this concept is to focus a little less on what my zone of genius is today, by the way, because zone of genius evolves over time. Because that's intimidating. People, in my experience, just freak out. Like they wring their hands and they start sweating and rubbing their forehead. And it's like, how do I figure out my zone of genius? It sounds like the Holy Grail, and I think it's hard. But I think people have way more access to noticing their zone of excellence, which is the next level down from genius. And the reason they have access to it is frequently the thing that they have been doing for a long time or some period of time. They do it quite well. They do it very well. They get promotions, they get praise, they get love. People talk about them over Thanksgiving and how good they are at this. They're just gifted at it. Then often they get promoted into the next job, and they hold on to these things in their zone of excellence. Why? Because they know how to do those things. And as humans, in my experience, we generally like to do things we know how to do really, really well, and that we get rewarded for in our economy and over Thanksgiving. So usually, if you just pay attention to what's something that maybe used to be a zone of genius, but is floated down to zone of excellence, the way to recognize that is, I can't stop doing it. When I try to delegate it to other people, I end up pulling it back because I have a story that I'm better at it than they are. And so I'm going to do it myself. And then the third thing is, when I do it all day, I'm just tired and bored at the end of the day, even though I'm great at it. That is how you can tell you're in zone of excellence. So the way to think, in my experience, about genius is, what is the thing I'm starting to be lit up about? But when I think about doing it more, I make up a whole bunch of stories that it's impossible, that it'll never work.
That is such a good way to identify it. I'm thinking about it in myself even right now as you're talking.
Well, say more about that. Give us an example of something that is excellence or genius for you.
I love having conversations with people like this. Like, that is what I love the most. And I also love pulling stories out of people and creating content for them, like to share the values and share the things that they never would think were interesting about who they are, to share with the world. And for a long time, I did a lot of social media creation for people because that was my zone of excellence, because I was good at pulling out those stories and helping people create those things. But then I was also like implementing that all day. Right.
Yeah.
And so I was constantly implementing that. And that kind of work really just wore me out, just really took all of the fun out of the conversation that I have with people. So
Yeah.
having podcast conversations like this, or having coaching calls with my clients and like talking to them about their unique, specific challenges that they're working through and like working through that with them. It feels like, oh, that's the same thing I used to do with social media. I still used to have like, let me pull out your unique challenges. Let's see how we can solve them with your content. Let's do all of that. But now I get to do it in a different way. It's not even about like the trading time for money part. It's more about like this actually, at the end of the day, I feel really good about the conversations I've had. And I feel really good about the help and the value that I've provided. Where at the end of the day, before, I felt good about what I was providing to people as a service, but it still felt like I was just like exhausted by the process, you know?
Great.
So
I got it.
yeah, I was thinking about that.
Yeah, that's wonderful. When you started shifting the focus of your work over to doing what you just described as genius, did you have any stories that this will never work? Do you still have stories? Does that arise for you?
Well, I mean, I can think of a million times in my life. Like, I started that store when I was 19, and I started the non-for-profit with a group of other businesses when I was like 23. So at those times, I felt like I had no idea what I was doing. And so when I started my own business, my marketing and consulting business around a similar time, like 2010, I was at first just doing the thing where there's a deliverable, right? And so I thought, because if I'm not offering a deliverable, why would people trust me to deliver value to them just purely by having conversations? And if I'm really thinking back on this, I think I actually had this conversation with Gay Hendricks on my podcast about like, I want to do more of this kind of more consulting type stuff. And now, several years later, here I am and doing that as like, that is the thing I do most of the time now. I still love pulling people's stories out, still love writing content for them. That is so much fun, but I don't do the implementation side as much anymore, where I'm like doing the day-to-day tasks of scheduling things and checking up on engagement and stuff like that. So yeah, I think it evolves over time. And there was plenty of times where I asked myself, like, would anyone actually want this as a part of a service that I would offer? Like, how do I know that somebody would actually like that or buy it? And like you, I lean into curiosity. I lean into asking people questions about what they want. I try things. I try putting things out there. And that's what I tell my clients now too, is like, there is no right way to build the business that you love. And if anyone tells you there's only one way to do it, then you should run the other way, because there's so many middle pieces between this way and that way that you can try. And it has to work for you. The best tool you're going to use, the best system you're going to use is the system that you're going to use. Like, is the one that you'll actually use. Is the tool that you'll actually use, right? So everything is different for everyone. And the principle that I always lean back on is that I always try. I always try the next step, and I always lean into it. I might throw a fit for like a day and be like, I don't know that this is going to work. I'm not sure that I can do this. And then I just do it. And that is the one guiding principle, I think, that has really been a pinnacle of why my business has been so successful over time.
Oh, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thanks for asking. I don't normally get to answer questions on my podcast, so thank you so much. Your book, something also that you talk about in your book is about being selective about who you work with. And I think a lot of people think, oh, I'm getting someone asking me for something. I have to say yes to everyone. Otherwise, I'm going to miss this opportunity. I'm going to miss this big opportunity. But they might not feel so good about the person that they're saying yes to. You talk about saying no nicely as one of the most powerful moves that somebody can make in their sales process. Tell me a little bit more about that.
So first of all, let's talk. Both you and I had a day when we were just starting out.
Yes.
And on that day, when you are just starting out, it is possible when you need to make rent that you will not say no, even if you think it won't be your favorite thing to do to work with a given prospect. That's okay. Let's just
Thanks for acknowledging that. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's provide a little forgiveness and a little love here. A lot of people are having adverse job things happen right now. And that can be really, really difficult. Or you can be your first day out of college or high school and you just need to make a living. Great. You will actually, in that situation, you'll actually learn this lesson yourself. So
yes.
What I'm trying to do is say, maybe learn it a little faster, because the way you'll learn the lesson is things will be terrible. You'll hate that work. The person will at some point do something obnoxious, like not pay you. And you'll get all sorts of signals, not from the universe, just from the friggin' job you're doing, that you are on the wrong track. So this is just a little bird saying, pay attention, because you will be better, work will be better, you will turn your flywheel faster, you will increase your top of funnel inbound leads more if you are doing work you love with people you admire. You will also get paid more if you're doing that. The second point is, and the more strategic point from a sales perspective is, passionate ambivalence invites you to put yourself on an even playing field with the party to whom you are selling. And that is challenging at times for people that think that selling is asking for something or asking someone to do something, especially something they may not want to do. That is a ridiculous construct for a sales conversation. So what I try to encourage people to do is to think about being an equal partner to a prospect in a chemistry call or a fit call or a pricing negotiation or a contract negotiation. And the way you do that is to be, one way you can do it, is to ensure that you are, and that the other party knows you are, selective about whom you work with. Now, don't just say it if it's not true. If you're never selective and you say you're selective, that disingenuous representation will be found out by everyone. I'm encouraging you to actually be selective for all the reasons that both you and I, Lauren, just talked about. So then you get to be in a chemistry call with a new prospect and say things like, well, of course, we're trying to decide if we are a mutual fit.
Yes.
When you can say that and it's actually true, your pricing is stronger, you're much more likely to close, and you're much more likely to be happy.
I have a sticky note on my computer here. I tell my clients about this all the time, because especially after we've been working together and I talk to them about how they are talking to their clients, but I have a sticky note that says all of the things I need to watch out for, that I am super susceptible to sliding into people who are picky and uncertain, bad communicators, micromanagers, and degrading. For some reason, I am like, those are the people I always slide into. So, and they always find me. And so I have a note on my computer that right up by where I would check my email to ask myself, when people want to work with me, if I think that they're kind of like their tone or how they're communicating falls into those categories, so I can be a little bit more discerning about who I work with.
Okay, Lauren, this is a great moment here.
Yes.
I love that you shared that. And I'm sorry that you've developed that pattern, because that pattern is probably not new. That's probably been with you for a long time, as you know. So I want people to notice this for a moment. first, it's a really good idea to make that kind of list for yourself. And by the way, you don't have to make that list just about whom you are more likely to sell to with compromise.
Yes.
You can also make that list. It's the same list, I think. You tell me if I'm wrong, Lauren, about people you are more likely to date or
Yep.
people you are more likely to befriend. Now, Lauren just said that she is likely to fall under the sway or the spell or to be unduly influenced by people who are degrading to her.
Mm-hmm.
If you're listening to this and your jaw hit the ground when she said that, I want to just pause here for a moment. Lauren, you obviously have been thinking a lot about this because you made that list. So just so we understand, when we have pitfalls or blind spots like that, there's a reason we have them. What is it, if you're game to say, if not,
Yeah.
your editor can cut this out, but what is it about people who are picky, micromanaging, and degrading that has historically served you, even in unconscious ways?
I think that, this is a good question.
Right?
So
Because
actually,
you wouldn't do it
yeah,
if it wasn't serving you.
this sticky note actually has been up here for about 6 years on this computer. So this is not a new thing. And actually it really helped me like guide a new era of my business a long time ago.
Awesome.
But I won't go into detail, but I was definitely in like a very toxic marriage. And so that was part of the communication styles that were very familiar to me, were some of those communication styles. And so it made it very likely for me to say like, oh, that's familiar. I know what to expect.
Totally. That's the same as zone of excellence. It's like, It's familiar. I get it. I know how to process this.
Mm-hmm.
And just familiar, even if it's bad, this is just for your listeners. Sorry, this is just a fun conversation for me. But familiar, even if it's bad, can be easier than unfamiliar, even if that might be good.
Right. Yes. And that is why a lot of people stay stuck in situations that are not serving them, because they're like, well, at least I know what to expect. I could say the same thing. And, I'm very open about this, but I could say the same thing about like my hysterectomy. I had a hysterectomy this year. And for a long time, I asked myself, would that be the best thing for me? Surprise, it was the best thing I've ever done for myself in my life. I should have had one a long time ago. I was in so much pain that I woke up ready to like run a 5K or something. Like I was just like in so much less pain when I woke up from surgery. But for a long time, I asked myself, if I wanted to stick with the familiar of having all of this pain and having these fibroids and all these medical things, or if I wanted to have a completely new experience that I wasn't sure if I was ready for yet. And so at the end of the day, I opted for the new unfamiliar experience, and my life is completely changed from it. I had endometriosis. I had a lot of damage. I felt like they cut a monster out of me. I'll just say that.
Wow.
So I do always say like, okay, use the tools you have, whether that's therapy, whether that's a really good coach, to try to find that self-awareness in you about where your blind spots might be, where the patterns that you keep falling into, relationships, friendships, business clients, a lot of those patterns that feel really familiar, but like are zapping your energy. Like which ones of those do you want to write down that just do not make you feel good? And that is why I have that up there. I haven't ever taken it down because I have it there to remind myself when something feels a little off, and I kind of take a look at that and I realize like those feel like a little bit of old me, like someone who would put up with those things. And at this point in my life, 15 years into my business, I don't really need to hold on to people like that anymore. So
that's wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. I want to just cut back to a theme of your podcast, which is personal brand.
Yes.
And because I think there's a connection point here. A lot of the people that I've run into since writing this book, doing a lot of speaking around this book, an aspect of their personal brand or forget about their personal brand. An aspect of them personally, totally differently from your amazing story, is just humility
Mm-hmm.
or an aversion to money. Like we're not allowed to talk about money, or we're not allowed to talk about being excellent, or none of those things were okay. We were raised in a culture or a household or from a certain background where those things were just not acceptable. We have tall poppy syndrome or whatever we have.
Yes.
I run into many people, it might even be most people that I run into in talking about this book, that believe that humility is the most important thing in their personal brand because that's how they were trained. And talk about safety. I mean, that is a
Yeah.
safe zone. If you're just going to walk around being humble and wait for other people, it will happen who will say, oh, come on, you're just being humble, to bring out your personal brand, right? They'll
Right.
do it for you. Your best friends will do it. They're at the dinner party sitting next to you and they'll say, oh, no, 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 let me really tell you about Lauren. They'll do
Yes.
that. But they're
Yes.
not with you every time you are out talking to potential prospects in the world.
Absolutely.
So when you're thinking about how to do what I call walking around marketing, what you call personal brand, remember what these old stories are, what these upper limits are in Gay Hendricks terms, what these limiting beliefs are, because often they're the things that are influencing your 30-second bio. And it's fine if that's what you want your 30-second bio to be. What you're representing is, hi, I'm Sue. This isn't true about me. I'm a really humble person. And if that's what you want to be selling, great. I don't personally think a lot of people buy humility. I think they like people who are not assholes or jerks, if you want
Yeah.
to cut out assholes because of the filter on
Oh no,
podcasts.
it's adult
It's
podcast. Yeah.
it's fine. Yeah. So, I mean, they don't want that, but they also don't want somebody who is unable to articulate what matters to them.
Yes. Yes. And I know you talk a lot about imposter syndrome and really using that imposter syndrome for good within yourself. Tell me about how someone might be able to use that rather than
Yeah.
kind of giving into the noise of it.
Yes. I mean, I think that the way I think about it is it's just there. I went through, but it's fine. And I've been going through a little bit of a tough time for the last 4 weeks and with a lot of grief about a thing. And a dear friend asked this question because, it's just grief. Grief is grief. It's you
Hard.
wake up, it's
Yes.
all day and, whatever, you're functioning in the world and doing conference calls and podcasts, and then grief shows up. It's not here right now.
Oh,
And a person asked me this question: what would you do if that grief were with you, if you just knew that grief, some version, was going to be with you for the rest of your life, and there was nothing you could do to change it? And that was a great question, because what I realized was, well, that's possible, first of all. And second of all, what I would do is what I'm doing right now, which is like, I went to see Annie Hall in 35 millimeter at a really giant theater in Portland, Oregon, and I had
fun.
really good popcorn. And that was fun, And I went to the gym almost every day and lifted weights, because when I lift weights, I don't know if it's type 1 fun, but it's definitely type 2 fun. I feel good about myself when I
Yeah.
do that. So I do that. And I think imposter syndrome is a little like this. Like, it's likely that you are going to have voices talking to you behind whatever it is you're doing in the world, probably for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, cool. So let's just assume that. And then how are we going to manage with that happening in our lives? And most of us know that we easily can manage with that happening in our lives. It's just that the voices get louder when we're doing something new. So we just
Mm.
expect it. It's like, okay, I'm off to do something new and unknown. I'm sure my imposter voices will be a little bit louder, but I had my imposter voices 2 weeks ago when I tried this other thing that was more familiar to me. And I just said to them, hey, imposter voices, it's great to see. Thanks for showing up and keeping me humble and not making me
Yeah.
screw up and being sure I prepare for this podcast and all the things that you want me to do because you think I'm so lousy. Thank you for all of your gifts. And now I'm just going to go take this risk. I'll be back in a half hour or an hour. I'll be back. We'll talk. We'll touch base. But for now, just let me go for a while. And I think that's how I think about it.
I love that. And this brings me kind of into the more practical, actionable. You've actually given us a lot of practical, actionable things already, but I like to kind of dedicate the last, 15 or so minutes of the podcast to very actionable, practical things. And one of the things I think imposter syndrome leads to is how sometimes unconscious beliefs can really shape how people package things, how people price things, how people close, calls. Can you tell me a practical way someone can sort of reground their pricing or their confidence before a sales conversation?
Sure. This idea that I'm going to talk about came to me from Jim Dethmer, one of my teachers in the world of conscious leadership and co-author of the insanely best-selling book, The 15 Commitments of Conscious Leadership, which is going to be re-released soon.
Oh.
He articulated the idea that as you're thinking about pricing, you might want to think about what the value is of what you are going to deliver first. Just start there. And you don't always know, right? But what do I think the value will be to that person at that time? And that doesn't have to be your price, but just having some awareness, an honest conversation with yourself and maybe your prospect about what you think the value will help you ground your price almost always higher than you would normally go. And when I think about value, a lot of things come up. For example, if somebody needs something that I do in the next 2 weeks, the value of what I am doing for them is actually higher because they need it now. If somebody needs something that I specifically am uniquely good at, and I'll just give you and your audience an example of this. Sometimes it will happen that somebody has an issue at their company with the general counsel, the lawyer on their team. People in the world know that I am a lawyer who also has been in business for a long time. Okay, ChatGPT will tell them this. And so they will then reach out to me in a blind email. Cool, great. I will then be on the call. In that moment, to deliver that kind of thing for that person at that company, are there 5 people on earth who are able to do that as well as I can? Probably not. Okay. That's just pure alignment with who I am. My value, therefore, in that unique situation is higher. It doesn't mean I have to charge more. But it does mean that if I can just stay aware to what my value is in a given context based on the facts, that I could then get my pricing at least to a place of passionate ambivalence. And I could say things like this, like, this is amazing. This is an incredible fit. The power of the internet or of AI allowed you to find me. And so you might think there are another 75 people you're going to talk to after me that are as good a fit as I am. Go do that. Try.
Yeah.
I mean, have at it. That's fine with me. But it's probably not the case. And so when I think about how I price, I have more confidence. Does that resonate with you?
Very, very much so. Yeah. I think the disconnect from the outcome is hard for some folks. And at the same time, I know that every time I do disconnect from that and say, like, I know I know the value, not even just monetarily, but like I know the expertise value that I'm worth.
Yep.
If this person doesn't go with this package, this person I really want to work with, then I know that that is making space for something else that
Totally.
might and
happen. They may be back.
And they might be back.
They may be back in 6 months because they tried something else and it wasn't as good. One other thing I want to mention here is just the dumbest question ever in the history of questions in a pricing conversation. I strongly, strongly discourage people from asking, especially, maybe they ask at the beginning. You might ask this question at the very beginning. Someone blind emails you. You have no idea if they're a qualified prospect. They don't know you. They just found you on ChatGPT. You might, I wouldn't, but you might say, what is your budget for this thing that you're thinking about? I don't ask that question because I think it's a weak question. It implies that you would change your pricing based on their budget, which is asinine. I would almost never do that. I'm doing it now. I'm doing something really interesting with somebody I just love who lives a half a mile from me, and I admire this person. And so we have a kind of different pricing structure, but it's not because of his budget. It's because I don't know. This is interesting to me. It's right in my town. I don't have to
Yeah.
get on a plane and whatever. So just try not to ask that question, because when you ask it, it implies that your pricing is not connected to your value. It's connected to what someone else can pay. And even though it is important that someone else be able to pay for what you do, you put yourself in a subservient position every time you ask that question.
So I'm curious what you think about this, and I'm not going to change it no matter what you say. So,
Cool.
but I like the way that I do this, and I'm curious your thoughts on it, which is that when someone says, I want to work with you, and they want to get on a discovery call with me, they have to answer like 2 or 3 intake questions.
Yep.
One of those intake questions says something like, please check the box of which budget range you think you're in for this kind of service. I write in there that I have offers available for different budgets, and I want to make sure that this time is valuable to both of us. So not all of my I wouldn't offer them the high tier package or offer, but if I know what they're coming to the table with in that call, I know what to offer them, which
Great.
is some of my lower tier packages or some of my higher tier packages, depending on but not just that based on their budget, but based on what they actually need. So sometimes someone will be like, I really need this. I'm like, well, that is this program. That is this thing that I offer. It ranges around this price. And I tell people on the call what it's going to cost them, because I don't believe in like making it some weird secret thing, right?
Great.
But I do I love being prepared for the call. So I know what kinds of things to offer them that fit into my normal pricing. So I'm not adjusting any prices for them, but I'm giving them something that they need. I am curious about your take on that. Yeah.
Yes. I think as long as your lowest priced budget range corresponds with the product you actually have,
Yes.
Great. So, because the way I do that is, in order to work with me, you need to be prepared to spend X. That's what I would do at an early stage, which is the same thing as you're doing. You're just doing it with more detail because you have more, frankly, you have more products than I do. So great. I think that sounds, what we're trying to avoid is just a random question like, what's your budget? And they say $1,000. And you on the other side of the phone, not you, but somebody who might be listening to this says, I wonder what I could do for $1,000, because and you know this, I imagine this is your experience too, Lauren, like you have a price range that's X and they get on the phone and they're like, what I want is blah, blah, blah. And you're like, well, that price range is X plus X or Y. And they often will say, maybe we should be talking about Y. I'm sure that happens all the time.
I usually offer people a couple different options on the call. Sometimes I'll give them the option that's outside of their price range just because they might have been self-opting for a lower price,
Yeah.
And I want them to have the options. But generally, I feel like it gives me a more well-rounded view of where they're at, especially with the other 2 questions that I asked.
Yeah, great. I love it. Plus, you don't have to do calls for people who have a budget that's lower than your minimum budget.
That was the other thing, is that they self-opt out. So that way I don't have to spend time talking to people who just they already know they're not going to be a match,
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for this interview. The last question that I love to ask people is, what is one huge myth or lie that you would love to expel or change about selling and sales?
That the more you get in touch, or the more you're present, or the more you're on top of their inbox, the more likely they are to buy. What is true is they are more likely to think about you, but they are not more likely to buy what you're offering at your desired price point. That is complete fallacy. And I would suggest it's more often exactly the opposite.
I could not agree more. All right. Thank you so much, Sue, for being here. Where is the best place for people to find you online? Where do you like to hang out?
Sure. Well, my site is heysue.com. That's hey, like Hey, Sue.com. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. And the book is called Never Ask for the Sale, and you can get it anywhere books are sold.
Love it. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lauren. This has been great.
Amazing, friends. Sue shared so many powerful insights, but here's what I think will make the biggest difference for you as speakers, entrepreneurs, authors, and small business owners. 1, craft that clear 15 to 30 second bio that communicates your zone of genius and makes it easy for people to understand how you help. Sue believes that you should lead with the value you provide when pricing your work instead of anchoring on a prospect's budget. I really loved hearing her mindset about this. And then third, practice passionate ambivalence. So care deeply about your work without tying it to your self-worth or tying it to the energy of a single outcome. Those three things really stuck out to me. I would love to hear what stuck out to you. So just let me know. If this episode resonated with you, share it with a friend, tag me, L Davis Creative on pretty much any social media platform. You'll find all the links and the resources we mentioned in the show notes of this show. And thank you so much for listening to the Real Personal Branding Podcast. I'll talk to you next time.